Make sure you look cute.
All right, welcome everybody. Geoff Pontes here from Baseball America. I'm joined by a couple of my teammates, Collazo, Dylan White, one of our newer guys, now covering our fantasy department, kind of heading things up. You've been seeing some of our rankings roll out. Got some of my friends alongside me as well, Jesse Roach of Baseball Prospectus. Everybody knows James Anderson of RotoWire, and my buddy Chris Blessing of Baseball HQ. Gentlemen, how are you?
Good.
Great.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Peachy.
Very
Chris
on brand for Georgia. I appreciate
Chris was not well.
No. The delay on that peachy was excellent. But we're just sort of kicking things off here. We got the the BA Fantasy Summit, of course, coming up on February 25th. You can see some of the information there on the bottom of your screen. Sort of in preparation for that, we did a mock draft with some of the panelists. There are 12 panelists that are going to be involved that are involved in this mock draft that we did a couple weeks ago. We drafted a 12-team Roto League from scratch. It was 30-man rosters, kind of your typical roster setup in terms of 5 outfielders, middle infielder, corner infielder, first base, second base, third base, shortstop, catcher, 1 catcher, and then 9 pitchers. It's a little bit more shallow than the leagues that we typically would have done. I'm more used to 16, 20, even 30 team type of dynasty leagues. But I think 12 is probably the most common size for any league style or scoring. So it seemed more applicable. This is actually going to be featured in the March edition of the BA magazine as well. But I'm going to kick it over to some of you guys. You can pull some of the draft results up here on the screen. Maybe talk a little bit about the first round, sort of what you guys were thinking with your first round picks. Let me pull it up on the screen. I'm going to go over to Carlos first.
Oh, gosh.
We should go with Jesse first. Jesse had the first pick.
I did.
Rodriguez, first overall. How difficult of a decision was that for you?
It's not too difficult, to be honest. It was really between Julio Rodriguez and Ronald Acuna Jr. And, J-Rod has 3 years on him. I think that there's less of we don't have the injury history that Acuna has with Julio Rodriguez. I think that they have similar upside in terms of both power and speed. And I just think he right now is the number one guy in most fantasy formats, certainly in a 12-teamer. I wanted to get speed at the top, even in a 12-team format, and even with the new rule changes, I think that it is important to try to acquire young speed early if possible. It's not not something you have to do, but I think it's something that's important to do. And obviously both Rodriguez and Acuna both offer it for sure in spades. And I really do think that Julio Rodriguez, what we saw from him and how he adapted during his rookie year and really took off. He really got to his power as the season wore on. I think he's going to carry that forward. And I think he's a guy who's going to be a pretty consistent 30-30 player.
Yeah, I would agree there for sure. I think that he's a fairly easy pick at number one. I think this is also one of those things that you look back a year, Rodriguez is going to round 2, 3 even. And people think it's a risky pick sometimes with these top prospects, but often within a year or two in Dynasty, it sort of comes to fruition that that's the smart move. So now he's number one. He's still incredibly young. There's more upside, I think, to come as well. The power speed combination, just his ability to add athleticism, all that sort of stuff. I guess I'm the next on the live stream, is at least in terms of picks. I had pick 4. I ended up not going with speed. I went with Yordan Alvarez. I thought about Fernando Tatis Jr. I thought about Tucker a little bit. I certainly thought about Ohtani as well. But I just feel like the combination of power, batting average, where he's going to hit in that lineup, run, RBI production, and the fact that he's still outfield eligible, sort of set it and forget it. It was like a consolation prize almost for Juan Soto a little bit. And this is a batting average setup, so the bump there in terms, I guess, Soto versus Alvarez wasn't tremendous. But I'll shut up about myself. I'll move on over to Chris. You ended up going with Ohtani at 7.
Yeah.
How difficult of a decision was that for you? Was there anybody else you were considering there at 7?
It was fairly easy after Dylan took Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker was really kind of my target at that pick, and there will be a continued theme here where I felt like Dylan took my pick every time for at least the first, the odd number rounds, maybe up to about 7. It felt like I was either between two guys or that. And that was pretty much it. Ohtani was the best player available, and that's why I went with him.
Dylan, we're going to go back over to you. Tucker, how high would you have taken Tucker in terms of where you have him on your rankings in a startup? You take him at 4, you take him at 5, or do you kind of like him where he is at 6?
I like him where he is at 6. I wouldn't feel bad or feel I jumped the gun if I took him earlier. I was really hoping Jordan would take Tatis, which he did, because if he didn't, I would be like agonizing on whether I should take the plunge on Tatis or not. I'm glad he took him, so I didn't have to make that decision. So yeah, Tucker, power, speed. It's I like what Jesse was saying. You want to get speed early, youth. That's the guy to take.
And Los, you went with Aaron Judge at 10. You definitely, you and Jesse and Dylan kind of built like the best right now teams, if I remember looking at the scoring. Dylan can probably update me on that if I'm incorrect or inaccurate. But Judge, I mean, were there any other guys that you're considering there?
Yeah, I was considering Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and then he went one spot in front of me. I was honestly a little surprised that he fell that far. I wasn't even thinking that I would have a chance at him. Just the ability to lock up a hitter like him at first base. With the age, I was really hoping he fell to me, and then when that didn't happen, it really felt like I was almost boxed in to going win now. The best players on the board for me were a bunch of 30-year-olds or older, so I was just like, why not? I'll take Judge. He's probably the best player available at this point in a redraft league. Just load up right now on now talents and guys who are going to help right away, and then see if I can maybe do some damage in later rounds with prospects. Because I also wanted to. I probably have the least experience in fantasy of the group and of everyone who is drafting here, so I was kind of trying to gauge how early some of these prospects were going to start going off the board. So it almost felt like a safe pick for me, just in terms of feeling out the board and the other drafters, and also just taking a guy who I knew would be pretty solid overall in terms of helping me out right now.
And then James, you ended up going Austin Riley at 12, and then sandwiched that with Pete Alonso. You got some serious power there. Any concerns in terms of speed? There was obviously a guy like Trey Turner sitting there on the board as well.
Not really. And I mean, for me, speed is kind of the 5th most important offensive category in Dynasty. The other 4 categories correlate very closely. Speed doesn't correlate that closely. So I want to build that base. I mean, I'd rather have Julio Rodriguez or Ronald Acuna, but I want to build that base of, average home runs, RBI, and then try to get the speed a little later. So it was really kind of a dream scenario there, because I also like to kind of err on the side of sort of early prime, pre-prime, early on. So Alonso and Riley was a pretty nice fit there.
I'm going to go back over to Dylan now. Dylan, you ended up going with Gunnar Henderson in the 2nd round, 19th overall. Who else are you kicking around there? How high would you have taken Henderson? Or is that sort of where his ceiling is for you at this point?
I might have gone early on Gunnar there. I saw Tim McLeod took Bobby Witt Jr. in the 1st round, and then Corbin Carroll in the 2nd. And I thought, okay, here we go. It's going to be aggressive on youth. And so I thought if I was going to take Gunnar, it'd have to be now. I don't regret the pick. I think as you mentioned at the top, a 12-team league is reasonably shallow, so you can still choose. You're not committed if you go young or if you go old. You can still pivot and still have a quality team, in my opinion. So I went with Gunnar. Power, speed, young, just fits my mold right now.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback that. I think in 12-team leagues and shallow formats, it's important to try and chase upside, because you can hedge against all the risk you're taking on with high upside plays with the depth that, the replacement value is very high in shallower formats.
Mhm.
And especially for like prospects, you're going to find maybe there might be 100 prospects rostered in a lot of 12 team leagues, and that's about it. So there's going to be a lot of prospects that pop throughout the season, for example. So that's why if I'm doing a dynasty startup in like a 12 teamer, I'm just not really paying much attention to prospects that are not going to be contributing to my team right away. They're going to be players that I push way down my board because I know I can get prospects on waivers. And that's the same thing like with someone like a Gunnar Henderson. You chase that potential, that upside. Like this is a guy who legitimately could be like a 30 home run bat with speed and has exceptional plate discipline, like elite plate discipline. And he's on an up and coming Orioles roster. I mean, I like being aggressive with those types of picks. And same thing with Judge earlier. Judge, I'm not afraid to take like a 30-year-old in the first round in a 12 teamer because you can hedge against the risk of decline with all your other picks.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to go back over to you because I really liked when I was like going through the draft, your top 3 picks I loved. Ton of upside here. Rodriguez, as we mentioned, you went Wander Franco in the second, and then Louis Robert, or Robert, depending upon what his pronunciation is. Still haven't gotten that one straight.
I think it's Robert.
Is it? We're going back to Robert.
I think it was Robert, and he was just like fine with people calling him that, and actually he was like, it's actually pronounced Robert. I believe that's what it is.
And was like, actually, guys, this is really what my name is. But I liked that chasing upside at the top. I mean, like obviously all those guys are certainly reasonable in those spots. It's not like you had any reaches, but we could look back in like 3 years, and that's a pretty formidable, group at the top. You have speed, you do have power. There's more upside, and then like you sort of backfilled with a lot of vets afterward and some good pitching over the next several rounds. So sort of looking like through these first 10 rounds, Jesse, on your squad. Like what was your mentality in terms of like get these 3 guys and then like you loaded up and you had five of your next 6 picks after round 3 were pitchers?
Yeah. I think that if there was ever a mistake I made in my mind in this draft, it was going so pitcher heavy. Look, pitching in general in a league like this in a 12-teamer is going to fall because there's 9 pitching slots, and there's just going to be pitchers that fall. Generally, it's not, their scarcity is just not there for it. And I think going so pitcher heavy, I don't mind it, but I think that I should have tried to get a third baseman. This has been like sort of a mantra for me this entire offseason is I want to hit third base pretty early in drafts. Even in dynasty drafts, I'm willing to do it. It's not as big a deal in dynasty because this severe top heavy nature of the position this year may just be like a 1-year thing. Like next year, we might see like the emergence of people like Curtis Mead, who I did draft later on in this draft. But I really don't like getting stuck with those mid-tier options at third base. So my big regret was not taking Nolan Arenado in the 4th round and or the 4th or 5th round, the 4th, 5th turn, and taking Cease and Urias, even though I do prefer them generally in Dynasty. But Arenado, he's almost 32 years old. But again, in a 12-teamer, I'm not as concerned with age. And so I should have tried to lock up a top talent at a scarce position early, and that was my big snafu. But I mean, yeah, generally I really do like my draft. I like the swings on Franco and Robert. I think that Robert, he's a guy who people are going to be down on because a lot of the data that he put out last year is down from what it has been, particularly his speed. But the speed was impacted directly by the injury. So I think for people who are injured, we need to be a little cautious in terms of like reading too much into like sprint speed or like home the first times in the year they're injured because it's impacted. So I think the speed's still there, the power's legit, and he's a player who he has a terrible approach. He swings at everything, but that's not necessarily bad for 5x5 for average base formats because it means he's going to put a lot of balls in play, and he's going to hopefully drive a high average.
Yeah, and in an OBP format, a guy like him probably gets depressed. I think he took Tim Anderson a little bit later. Kind of the same thing. Like he's a really good player in 5x5 classic average sort of scoring formats. When you go to OBP, when you go to point scoring, it changes. And I think that's always the lesson when we talk about any sort of build. It's like, what's your league scoring? What's the style? What's the setup? And then eventually, you'll know what the room is like after, year 2, year 3, and what people's likes and dislikes are if they stick around. James, I want to go back over to you. You were the guy that held out the longest on pitching. You didn't take a pitcher until round 9 with Luis Severino. I've played in a ton of Dynasty leagues with you, startups over the years. And you always, come out, I think, with just one of the deeper rosters in whatever league you're in. Is that by design in terms of did you know, hey, I'm not going to even think about taking a pitcher until round 9, or was it something you were thinking about a little bit earlier and just the way the card sort of fell?
No, I mean, I was open to taking pitchers a couple times. Almost ended up with Aaron Nola at the 3-4 turn, and almost ended up with Shane Bieber at the 5-6 turn. But I wasn't going to force it. And when I started Riley Alonso, especially after I took O'Neal Cruz in the 3rd, I was very certain that I was going to try to win in 2024. So, getting that impact starting pitching that you need to win a 12-team league wasn't really a focus. And I was just more focused on building out my offensive core.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And you have one of the better, cores here, just sort of reviewing. I want to put it back on the screen because we could barely read it. But Riley Alonso, O'Neal Cruz, Matt Olson, Brian Reynolds, Andreas Jimenez, Tyler O'Neill, and Seiya Suzuki before you took Luis Severino. And I feel like with a lot of those picks too, still fairly young, a lot of upside, even a guy like Reynolds, if he gets traded into a better situation, if that ever actually happens, that's there's some more upside there in terms of run production, RBI, stuff like that, depending upon where he does end up eventually. I wanted to go over to Chris, and then we'll go over to Dylan again. But Chris, your top 4 or 5 picks, man, are just pants tent city. Ohtani, Michael Harris, Jazz Chisholm, Jordan Walker, and then Manoah. How happy were you at the beginning of that draft? Because looking at the top 5 here, that's about as good as anybody pulled, just in terms of talent. I mean, you took some risks there too. There's definitely
a lot of risk,
round 2, 3, 4 for sure. But what are your thoughts there? And what are your thoughts on Walker in terms of? I know the hot buzz, it seems, is that he's going to break camp. I don't know if I see that. I think he's going to spend most of the year in AAA. But where do you stand on that? Are you expecting to see Walker up early?
I actually drafted him thinking, along the same lines as you. I don't believe he's starting to, begin the season in the major leagues. I look at my team right now, especially those top 5 picks, and I really wonder if it was scouting bias when I was doing it, because 4 of those 5 guys after Ohtani are guys that I extensively had looks at as kind of helping out maybe with some team that I was associated with at one point. So I don't know if that really drew that out for me. I was extremely cringy with the Jazz pick just at that point. I felt like I reached a bit for him. It's not this does not tend to be my roster usually. My roster, even in a startup, is usually older guys. But I found a pattern, and I just went in kind of like what James said. I don't necessarily expect to compete this year. I think I have a solid team, but I don't believe I got a lot of guys entering their prime. So I'm looking at reaching for the stars, and the top of the standings in maybe year 2 to year 3, and getting there, as opposed to right now. And that's just how it kind of played out for me.
I agree there. Absolutely. The Jazz one, you never know how that's going to play out, but we've seen spurts. And I mean, we just released our second base Dynasty rankings today, Dylan and I up in the site, and we have Jazz number 1. So
I have a number 1.
Yeah, top second baseman. Come on now, Chris, get behind it.
How will the position change with Jazz impact how you guys view him long term in a Dynasty format? if he loses that second base eligibility in the future? How does that change his overall profile for you guys?
I think it depends. It depends on how he does, how he produces. I think that if he does what he was on pace to do last year, which was wild. I mean, if you extrapolate his performance last year out over the pace he had for a full season, it's like 32 home runs, 27 stolen bases, 120 runs, which is crazy. If he does something like that, even if he's an outfielder, I mean, that's a player who's a potential first-round pick anyway. I think just, how much average you'll hit, it depends. I mean, I think that for a 12-teamer, it matters maybe a bit more than in other formats, just because you want to having that one player at a position that stands out, like at second base, is important. It's more important, I think, in shallow than in deeper formats.
But I think there's so many dynasty formats too, where you carry so many more outfielders than you do any other position. So, being able to have depth there isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, you only really need to roster one, maybe two second basemen, in a middle infield spot. And of course you could fill it with, shortstops, et cetera, too. So like if you have 5 outfielders, I don't think he necessarily loses a tremendous amount of value in that sort of typical roto setup. I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in on the Jazz potential position change here or not.
Yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
No, I was just going to say, I was considering taking him there right before you for another snipe.
I was considering him instead of Robar. So.
And then I said, this position change, I'm going to be asked about it, so maybe I'll just take Shane McClanahan instead.
And I look at it, looking at the outfield depth right now, I don't think the depth is that great on the major league level. Probably the weakest I've seen since I've been kind of a serious player last decade or so. So him going to the outfield, yes, rather have it at second base, but still, I think it's a dynamic profile that, could very well be, if everything works out, the top 15 performer in a format like this. Top 10.
I think you're right. Dylan, I wanted to go back over to you. You have a nice little pattern here. It was 2 position players, pitcher, 2 position players, pitcher, position player, 2 pitchers. Was that intentional? Or in terms of how you built this? Because you did find a balance early between, your position guys and your pitching as well.
I don't know if it was a plan. I actually wanted DeGrom, and then Jordan took him. I'm a big DeGrom fan, even with all the questions surrounding his health, etc.
More today. Breaking news, more today.
Including today, yeah, exactly. And so that's where I had the dilemma about Jazz. And then so I took McClanahan. Then I took Randy Arozarena, more power, speed. And then Paul Goldschmidt in the 5th. I just felt he was kind of like the best available if I was going to go for it in 23. And so I took him. And then since I committed, quote unquote, coming back in the 6th, then Max Scherzer was there. And I really like him for this year as well. So I ended up taking those 2 guys because they seem to be clearly, for me, the best guys available at the time for this year. And then my next pick in the 7th was Cedric Mullins, another power speed guy. So I just kind of happened to fall that way. It wasn't really a plan beforehand or a blueprint that I was sticking to. I like to have maybe two hitters per pitcher for the first 10 rounds of a redraft or a dynasty league. You don't want to go 2 pitcher heavy. Kind of speaking to what Jesse was saying. But yeah, that's just the way it worked out.
And Carlos, you were very, very win now heavy over the first, say, 8 rounds, and then you took a pretty hard left turn there into some prospect upside with Marcelo Mayer and Andrew Painter. Were you starting to get as somebody who writes about prospects? Were you starting to get a little jealous, like you had to jump in on the prospect while the getting was good there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you took Ellie De La Cruz in the 6th. I knew that I wanted to establish a core of big leaguers. And for me, I really wanted to dip into prospects and at least get a couple players that I viewed in kind of the top tier of current prospects now. Once I dipped into that, I was fine going back with more win now players because I feel like just the tiering of prospects levels off for a while after those players. Marcelo Mayer was actually maybe one of the bigger regrets that I had because Jackson Holiday went a few picks later, and I'm wondering if like he would have been a better pick considering the format. I think he's got a better chance to add a lot of speed. Marcelo Meyer, basically, it's just going to be hitting power. I do think it's interesting, though, the gap between guys like Jordan Lawler and Ellie De La Cruz and Meyer in the 9th round. Is that all just speed driven in the fantasy community? Because I do feel like in terms of their real life actual value, you can make the case that Meyer is the best shortstop prospect of that trio. So I was fine getting him there. I think Jackson Holiday was a sneaky good pick afterwards. And then with Painter, I probably would want to avoid pitching prospects in general, but I do feel like Painter is good enough that I felt confident taking him. I think it's very tough to find elite top of the rotation arms, and I think Painter has a chance to be exactly that. I think he's got a chance to add some value in the very near future as well. So I was happy getting him and just seeing some of the pitching prospects that were going off the board. I think Grayson Rodriguez was the first guy who came off the board. So I was like, all right, if I don't take Painter now, I'm probably not going to get him. So I wanted to just take a chance and get a couple of the guys who we have kind of in that top 10 range of prospects overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think I just got so caught up in wanting to get some sexy upside that I sort of jumped the shark and ended up going with Ellie De La Cruz after taking Arenado and Bichette and Alcantara and Jordan and Andrew Vaughn, which I don't know. I feel like I'm out on an island still on Andrew Vaughn, but I still believe that he's going to be a 25 for the home run guy, but we'll see if that happens or not. I'm hoping the move to first base full time and like him not having to learn the outfield, the position that he
Not
is.
having him to be the worst outfielder in baseball. Yeah, that might be a good thing, right?
You would think. I mean, I never
everybody?
thought in a million years that guy would end up playing any position but like first base.
I mean, you even played second base. It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
I mean, hey, he was a shortstop in high school.
Oof. Yeah, the game's a little different there.
I feel like his manager was asleep at the wheel. So.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Ooh, dun-dun-sh, dun-dun-sh. Excellent. That was excellent, Chris. I
That was quick,
appreciate
too.
that. Hopefully he's not watching. He'll fall asleep in his chair yelling at you, man. So let's move on to some tougher questions. I'm going to go over to Blessing first. What's the pick that you made that you hate the most? I know what mine is on my team.
Looking at this list, it's the same thing. We provided draft blurbs, and I was like, I've never had a share of Adalis Garcia anywhere. And that bothers me that I picked him over so many other great players. I guess I was using some of our projections at Baseball HQ, and it was a fiery projection, and sometimes I have to remind myself that that's not necessarily how I feel about a guy. So that's probably my biggest miss of at least the first 10 rounds. I'm sure there's plenty of others too. I'm also banking on a lot of guys that are post-hype types like Alec Baum and CJ Abrams. I purposely took that. I purposely did that, but even looking now, there's a degree of risk there. And since I pretty much gave up on competing this year, I figured might as well take a risk on somebody like Abrams, and especially like Baum with third base eligibility at that point. But I don't think I would have normally done that.
I mean, I think your value on Abrams at 210 was fantastic, even in a 12-teamer. I mean, just because if he pops, I mean, that's just like gold. Because there's a lot more power there than what he's shown in the major league level. And
yeah, I agree.
I mean, I think that he's not going to be like a 20 home run guy likely, but I mean, I think he'll potentially get up to double-digit homers, and the speed's legit. I think he could surprise a lot of people this year.
What do you think about that, Los? What do you project out Abrams to be in terms of power? Like, how are you viewing him at draft time? I know you were obviously our draft guy, covering that particular class. So
yeah,
what the projection was and what scouts were saying at the time.
I mean, at the time, scouts were a lot lighter on his ability to even stick at shortstop. So I think in some ways he's overperformed the expectations at the time. There are a lot of people who expected him to move to center field at the time. I've always been a little bit lighter on CJ Abrams, I think, than even most people at Baseball America. And even now, I'm probably a little bit more skeptical. I just question what that impact is going to be. I think there's a chance that he's always more of that just high contact, good bat to ball skills guy who runs a lot, and so he's going to have a higher batting average, get on base, steal some bases. I'm open to being proven wrong about the power. I don't necessarily know what I would expect him to do in any given year. I think for peak seasons, it wouldn't surprise me if he got to maybe 15, 20 range, but I probably am not the guy to ask about for the CJ Abrams hype, just in terms of power production.
You're exactly the guy I want to ask because I want to get the negative. We want to get the negative feelings out there, right?
No, I'm not entirely down on him. I do think what he's done defensively has been impressive. He's just a very lean guy still. I haven't checked the exit velocity numbers with him specifically, but I do wonder if he's going to be a guy who's just always consistently lean. We see some players who just never put on as much weight as you would expect. It wouldn't shock me if he was that type, but if he showed up a little bit bigger, I think he does have the pure bat to ball skills where maybe he could surprise you with the amount of power he gets to, just considering the raw power that he does have.
He also feels like one of those guys where like people start to project, there's a lot of hype around him as a prospect. He gets sort of overranked and then he struggles a little bit. And it's like the market adjusts a little bit on him. And the price point probably is fair now. For what the expectations are,
I feel like the way CJ Abrams was evaluated pretty much after his rookie ball debut was just crazy. Like I remember people were putting him over Bobby Witt Jr. I think we had CJ Abrams right over Bobby Witt Jr. right after that time, and I was strongly against it at the time. But I mean, it's tricky. You never really know with baseball prospects. Their development isn't linear, as we all know. But he does have some skills that are really hard to just teach, that are inherent skills that he has. So. I mean, what is he? He's going to be 22 years old. There's still plenty of development that could come with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go over to James. Looking at your own team, are there any picks that you kind of regret? It could even be later, too. It doesn't have to necessarily be high.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fun thing about a 12-teamer is, you're not going to dislike too many of your picks, probably. But Termarr Johnson, I think the value – in general, like I got him in the 19th round, sort of the players that he was going around in a deeper league, I wouldn't trade him for those guys. But thinking about the 12-team factor here, I mean, getting a guy like Gavin Williams or even Oscar Gonzalez, maybe just guys that I might know sooner if they're going to be impact pieces for me at the big league level, might have made more sense there. But I mean, I do like Termarr. I mean, I think he could pop this year, but it just the way that the really young prospects were trending in this draft, that might have been a bit of a reach.
Yeah.
I kind of like that pick. We talk about players with power. I think Termarr has legitimate power. I mean, we heard like plus raw at the currently in high school. The batting practices that he showed were oftentimes more impressive than Elijah Green, who did hit for more home run power in games. I'm probably extremely high on Termarr Johnson. He's just the best amateur hitter that I've ever seen personally. But I think I'm not sure. What do you guys think about his power in general? Because I do think just given his size, people might sleep on it a little bit. I'm certainly a buyer for Termarr's impact and his power.
I do not think it's plus. I'm there. I mean, I don't think the data supports plus. The bat speed's ridiculous, though. I think the bat speed is like 70, maybe like close to. It's like ridiculous. Great. It's crazy bat speed. And I think that bat speed, he's still just 18 years old. I think there's a chance he could get to plus in time. I mean, already I think that the power he is showing in games is at least average. And I think that the question is, in my mind, though, is how much is that going to turn into for fantasy purposes over the fence power? Because I think the power plays more like gap to gap. He is very much a very good hitter, like you said. I mean, I think he kind of prioritizes that hard all-field contact rather than just like lift and pull, but professional instruction, that may change. And he may all of a sudden get to a lot of power. The only home run he hit last year in his debut was an inside the park home run. Not that, I mean, the debut sample size is teeny tiny, but in that debut, he also had like 30 batted balls in play, and 10 of them were hit over 100 miles an hour. So like, it's a legit pop. It's a legit power, but it might play more line drive than home run.
One of the things I was impressed with when he was on the amateur was his ability to get to that inside fastball specifically. Most of his power as a high schooler, and mind you, I didn't get to see the showcases or anything like that, but it was mostly to the pull side, and that sort of angles he was able to achieve were consistent with a guy that I would say was a plus home run hitter. The one thing that I didn't necessarily see outside of batting practice might have been that being able to hit the ball out the other way. But, we've seen in today's game specifically with guys with high hit tools like this and a good understanding of launch angle that, and I think he naturally has that. They tend to play up that sort of tool. And I believe he'll be a power hitter. The power tool will be plus by the time he gets to the major leagues.
And just to throw it out there, like, in his debut, granted it was like 82 plate appearances, but average exit velocity 89 miles per hour. The 90th percentile was 105.2. Max was 107, 32.6% hard hit rate. So, I mean, he does hit the ball really hard for an 18-year-old. There aren't many guys other than like Josh Baez that were like 18 coming out of the draft over the last couple of years that hit the ball as hard as he did. So, I don't know. I still tend to believe in it. We better hope the power is plus, because he's going to have to hit. I mean, he's not going to be an elite defensive shortstop. So,
I mean, a big part of the question for this specific pick is how quickly do you think he can get to the majors?
Yeah.
Guys that because could he be one of those guys that's just super quick to the majors? That would really kind of improve the quality of that pick, I think, in this season.
I mean, I could see it. They were pretty aggressive with him, honestly, putting him right in low A after not doing well at the complex for whatever that's worth. But put him right in low A, and he really did perform in low A. And I think that I could conceivably see him finishing the season in Double A. I mean, the Pirates have been fairly conservative with a lot of their younger prospects lately, though. So, but their window is approaching. They're like a competitive window, so I imagine they'll probably try and fast track him.
Yeah. In terms of skills, I could see it moving quickly. The only question I would have with Termarr really is how does the body hold up over a full pro season? I mean, he had some knick-knack injuries in high school. It's a body type that I think might be injury prone, so that'd be a question I would want him to maybe answer. But in terms of skills, it wouldn't shock me if he was one of those fast-moving players.
Yeah, he's going to get to go to Greensboro fairly quickly, which, what's better than hitting home runs in Greensboro? It made me Gonzalez look like a power hitter, even with a broken wrist. Of course,
that used to be my home field, and man, it was an offensive. It was great.
Yeah, it's one of those parks where you kind of got to do it. It's like Ash. Asheville's the same way. You got to do some double takes on those home run totals, and should you really trust this number? I'm gonna go to myself here on the. I hated my Sandy Alcantara pick. I immediately in the third round, 28th overall. I wanted an ace. I kind of got a tilt a little bit. Burns went. I wanted Machado. I wanted Franco. I thought about Louis Robert, Robert, excuse me. And then
I think Jesse had clarified the Louis Robert. I think it is Robert, not Robert. I lied to you all.
How dare you, man? How dare you?
Sorry.
You're Cuban. I trust you, dude. Come on.
Well, the problem is it's not pronounced like your typical Latino player, so it's confusing.
And then Cole went and Harper, and I was like, I don't like any of these guys. And then ended up going with Alcantara, where I think I probably could have gone hitter here and held off for a few more rounds, especially looking at some of the guys that went after him. But
which hitter would you have taken at this spot? Because it was a little bit of a few pitchers, I guess.
Yeah, a few pitchers went, but I think I thought about Freeman. But I already had I thought about Freeman because as James had said before, getting that base of those strong four categories with Alvarez, Bichette, getting Freeman, who I think consistently is going to produce. We saw what he did last year, first year in a Dodgers uniform. And I think that was probably the guy that I was the heaviest on of that group. And then I tried to hope that Andrew Vaughn will develop into that, and took him the next round in the 4th. So I got a little bit of tilt there, I think, a little bit. But I'll pass it over to Dylan now. You've been quiet for too long, Dylan. So I'm putting you back in the hot.
So what happened was I was tracking the draft with projections, and I was near the top. And then so I'm like, you know what? I got to take this all the way. So I started picking guys like Pete Fairbanks and kind of win now guys to help ratios that I would never pick Pete Fairbanks in a dynasty startup where I did. I had Andres Munoz, same thing. I needed to get my rate stats a bit more competitive. James mentioned Oscar Gonzalez. He's not someone I would probably take as well. So just near the back third, it was I was just focusing on what the numbers were going to look like for me as I went this year. So I went a bit off brand, went a bit off book, but yeah.
What do the projections look like?
It's you and me, Jesse, at the top, 96 and 95.5. These are using ATC projections, kind of the blend of them all. Matt Eddy's actually third at 92. I think, Carlos, when you went with Painter and Marcelo Mayer,
I really fell off hard there, huh?
Yeah.
You're first at that point, I think.
I couldn't keep taking old guys. I needed at least some of these exciting prospects. I couldn't hit the guaranteed value. I needed some of the guys that might be nothing.
But it's I love those picks, these prospect picks that were going. I mean, those were probably the value picks. All things being equal, for equivalent trade value in season, probably you're probably better off to have the Mayer and the Painter and the Elliot De La Cruz types. But yeah, so that's how the I'm looking at the standings here now. It was me, Jesse, basically at a tie, and then Matt Eddy very close behind.
Who was last?
Last was Eric Cross.
Oh my god.
You're
It wasn't Chris.
You're sixth, Chris.
I was pretty low on there too, because I just took a ton of prospects. So
yeah.
I was totally playing for year 2 after drafting an old team in the beginning. But we'll see. This league does not play out, so we can just pretend it all happened. I'm gonna go over to you next, Jesse. So we're gonna say.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think it, goes to show the ways you can approach a dynasty draft. There's so many different strategies. I tend to have actually started to lean more and more into a pure win now perspective for dynasty, partly because I do a lot of prospecting. A lot of us do. So I can identify. I feel pretty confident in identifying prospects on free agency, on waivers, in season, and I don't want to spend draft capital on prospects I can get later. So typically in drafts, I try to go win now, and I've pushed more and more that way. For my early picks, I try to do a little younger, but I know there are some, and I know that Ian Kahn and Tom Trudeau are people who have pioneered this strategy of basically drafting all young, really young, going very young, getting the highest upside players all draft long, and then being incredibly active and trading in season to try then build a core. And then eventually there's a chance that turn into a juggernaut. You could have that Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt Jr. and Adley Rushman and all these top prospects that have turned into the top players at their positions or close to it. And that's a very viable strategy for sure as well in Dynasty, but a strategy like that also requires a lot of work because you have to
and some trust in your teammates for the league to be around, I would imagine.
Exactly, right? There's no guarantee that Dynasty leagues are going to be dynasties,
huge.
right? Some of them fold. A lot of them fold. A lot of industry leagues do fold a lot earlier than we hope to, and that's part of what we're doing. James and I, with the Highlander Dynasty Invitational, we're trying to create more sustainable dynasty formats with some rule tweaks that make basically enforce parity in a way, but make it so that people are engaged from top to bottom, the entire process.
What are some of the things you guys do to encourage that? Actually, that's interesting.
So for the Highlander, Brett drew up the first rules, but I've been in a few leagues. I think one of a rule that I love that not many leagues do is a poacher draft in the off season, where you can keep. You can keep a certain amount of players. In the Highlander, you only can keep 3, and then there's a 1-round poacher draft. And in other leagues, you can keep 5, and then there's a 2-round poacher draft. But it it basically, redistributes talent a little bit. Gives, and you can trade for poacher picks in season, so it allows teams to, teams are rebuilding to gather picks quickly and get basically get from worst to first in a quicker fashion than they would in a typical dynasty league. And that's the big issue, I think, a lot of dynasty formats is you're going to see this massive disparity between the top and the bottom if there isn't any kind of parity enforcing rules in place. And yes, it's maybe trends away from pure dynasty, and I know we all love pure dynasty formats, but I do think it's good for the health of the league.
Yeah, I got so mad over like those first few poacher drafts. I think yes, you can attest. I was like angry. There's like 5 guys with my kids. I'm like looking at all the players I lost in this poacher drafts, and I was like, damn it! I finished 5th. I have no chance. I'm going to be like 10th for the next 10 years now.
It's again these types of leagues. It's easy to rebound and get better because you can acquire these picks in season and use these picks. The thing is, Geoff, you traded all your picks.
Yeah, I traded my picks because I was trying to like win now, and then the trade blew up because it was Jesse Winker and then Rogers, who was at the time the Padres closer and getting saves, and I had like no saves, and then it turned out picking up Clay Holmes from the waiver wire was actually the majority of the saves I ended up having that season. So just goes to show, sometimes trying to make some win now trades doesn't always necessarily work. But
don't chase saves in Dynasty, guys. Don't do it.
But I was in first place, and it was like the only thing I wasn't scoring. And then like my team just fell off the map. I was believing that Connor Joe was actually good for the first month and a half of the season. So that's what happens when you read your own headlines. But we'll wrap up here in a second. I want to go around the room and sort of get your favorite pick from the drafts, whether it's your team or somebody else's. We're going to go over to Chris Blessing. And he's looking at me now like, why did you have to put me on the spot? But I'm putting you on the spot. So what was your favorite pick? Your team, somebody else's? Is there a pick that you wish you had made, someone else made, or you were like, somebody sniped you, something like that?
Well, I already talked about the Tucker thing, but like I was going after Shane McClanahan with the next pick when Dylan sniped him. And that really kind of changed my whole draft strategy at that point. I looked and I was like, I could build a team. I considered Freeman at that pick. I ended up going with Jazz, which I'm happy about, but like I was going pitcher there, and that wrecked my day.
How about you, Dylan? What was the pick you liked the most from the draft, whether it was your team or somebody else's?
The way Chris is saying, I kept sniping him. I felt Jordan was sniping me. He was right beside me, Jordan Rosenblum. So, like, just looking at his team, like, if you think of the ceiling of all these guys, maybe it's too much risk for most of us. But Fernando Tatis, he's got Jacob deGrom, Carlos Rodon, Tyler Glasnow, Byron Buxton, Christian Yelich, Royce Lewis, Spencer Torkelson. Like, if these guys have their peak season, their potential season without being injured, like, it's just going to be a monster season. So I'm not saying I like that, but it's just like, I'm definitely fascinated by how that's going to roll out.
For me, it was definitely Tyler O'Neill by James, just because I never have enough Tyler O'Neill, and I believe that he's going to bounce back in a big way this year. I'll never quit Tyler O'Neill. Since like 2016, he's been my boy. So I wanted that pick to bounce back, and that kind of shifted me a little bit in terms of the direction I was going. But I think I ended up on Vaughn Grisham the next round. But that was the pick that I wish I had made. That was one of my favorite picks in the draft. I think when you saw what he did in 2021, if you can repeat that full healthy season, there's going to be opportunities there in St. Louis. It's a batting average league, so once again, I don't worry as much about the approach. And just, getting that power and potentially like some speed, the combination of runs and RBIs is always big. And I think he could bring that. So, and plus he's my boy. I love Tyler O'Neill. I'll never quit. How about you, Jesse?
Oh man. My favorite picks, there's a few, and I think they kind of fell all in the second round. I love the Bo Bichette pick at 21. I think that that's just an absolute steal at that point in a standard 5x5 format. I think he's going to be like, I think he's going to be a lot better even than he was the last year and the last 2 years even. I'm not sure the speed will get back to what it was in 2021. The new rule changes will certainly help a player who was like 13 for 21 last year in steals. But I think he has 330 home run type upside that could happen as soon as this year. The Rogers Center, they moved in the fences. They're slightly higher, but I think that specifically is going to benefit Bichette, who is an all fields hitter. And he hits those balls in the gap that just hit the gaps and they don't go over the fence. But now they might. So I really do think that he could really explode and be a guy we're looking back on and saying, why did we let this guy who's young, still very young, fall all the way to 21 in this draft? But the other one is Manny Machado at 23. I was planning to take him at the turn there, and then I got sniped just because I wanted to lock up third base with a consistent option early. And oh well. But yeah, I think Bichette was one of my favorite ones early.
How about you, James? What was your favorite pick of the draft, yours or somebody else's?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with your team, Geoff, and Christopher Morel in the 16th. Could just not have good enough, pitch recognition, contact skills to be more than kind of a low average guy. But I think the way that he was pushed, I wasn't expecting him up when he was up, and I wasn't expecting him to tread water like he did. And physically, his tools, you look at the other hitters that went in the 16th round, he's got better power, speed, upside than all those guys pretty clearly if he hits. So I like that upside gamble in the 16th on Christopher Morel.
He's a really strong defender, too. I think I don't forget who maybe it was you, Dylan, I was talking to the other day, where I threw a Morel comp actually on Ceddanne Rafaela, where it was another guy, is a stand-up defender at shortstop, stand-up defender in the outfield, has this power speed mix with that approach, but can kind of make it work because he's so twitchy and explosive. And I got Morel last year in my 30-team league off of the waiver wire, in the first 2 weeks of the season, because I saw that he was hitting and the numbers were up, the stuff was up a little bit, the data was up a little bit. I was all right, this is kind of interesting. Held on to him. I did not anticipate he was going to be up that quick, and then ended up being one of my core players, I think, going forward on that team. In 30-team leagues, you get a guy like that off the waiver wire, it's absolute gold. So I'm kind of attached to Morel a little bit.
Morel had the, I believe, worst zone contact rate in all of baseball, or something like that last year. It's scary. It's scary, guys.
And terrible against high fastballs or something like that too. But it's a gamble for sure. But I just don't know why the Cubs would not sort of see what they have in him this season, because the upside is worth exploring, and he was just sort of so far ahead of schedule that I don't want to ding him too much and just kind of write him off, especially since he still produces.
If anything, I think his role could help him have multi-positional eligibility next year, because I don't think he's going to be the locked-in guy at third, because they have out wisdom. And Morel has good experience across the infield, so he could be a guy who, again, has multi-positional eligibility, which would be nice.
He's their Tommy Edman. They're good. They want to move him around. They don't want to stick him somewhere.
Nice. I'm rooting against the pick. I've never liked him, so.
All right, let's wrap us up here. I think you're the only one I haven't asked this question to yet.
All right, I've got a few, but I can go a little quicker. The one that I liked was 1-1, Julio Rodriguez, only because I took him in the second round in our Dynasty League with Baseball America a year ago, so that made me feel good about doing that. So I was happy. I was curious to see which one of those kind of elite young outfielders would go first. So I like that one. I felt like Shelley sniped me throughout the entire draft. Adley Rutschman in the third round. Yeah, Adley Rutschman in the third round. I really wanted Adley to get to me there. I felt like that maybe could have allowed me to have a little bit more balance between veteran players and some really elite young players. I just think that it maybe in fantasy catcher is a little dicier to figure out, but I feel like with his offensive ability, the power, the hitting ability, the approach, you're just kind of banking your catcher position for a very long time. That has to be pretty nice. And then later on, I guess my favorite of my own picks, not that this was a great pick, but I liked getting Spencer Strider, because I think this pick was actually one that kind of got auto drafted, we had some issues with the first night when it was supposed to pause, and I was like, I really want to get Spencer Strider here, so I was able to. We kind of wound it back, and I was able to get him in the 4th round. And then one other pick that I liked was again Shelley taking James Wood in the 9th round. I'm super high on James Wood as a hitter. I love the approach. I like the contact ability. I love the power, the size. I think if you want to take an upside swing on a young prospect, James Wood is a player I'd love to do it with. So those are some that I really liked.
Yeah, I am looking forward to my spring training on the East Coast of Florida again this year, because the Washington Nationals, unlike last year, actually have some prospects to watch outside of Brady House. I mean, it was Brady House, and I remember getting excited for Dustin Sinaz because there was like no one else that was even remotely interesting on those backfields other than House. So, and it's share a parking lot with the Astros, so you can kind of go back and forth between the two complexes and have like 8 games going on at once, which not too shabby if you're able to pull that off. But all right, guys, Dylan, any last thoughts on here? I think I already asked you what your favorite pick was, right? Told me, Jordan.
Yeah, no. I just look down his roster even further, and Chris Sale is on there as well. Like, it's just all Alberto Mondesi. It's all Asturi Ruiz, all upside, all like if they hit their ceiling. But there's so much risk for all those picks. I'm still flummoxed by the commitment. I wanted one of them to come to me.
The data guy loving the other data guy's picks. 2 robots battling it out. I love that. But guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you everybody that tuned in to this live stream. You can tune back in. It's going to be live on Baseball America if you are a subscriber. If not, we have details that I'll flash one more time at the bottom of the screen. You can sign up. We have the Fantasy Summit coming up on February 25th. It's going to run from probably like 1 o'clock, 12:30 until like 9, 10 o'clock at night. We have a ton of different topics we're going to be covering. Everything from NFBC leagues, dynasty startups, redraft stuff, sleepers, Japanese players. We got Tim McLeod and Kyle Glazer, both guys that follow, the NPB fairly heavily. Are going to be talking about players that have come over, some of the new imports like Senga, Yoshida, but also a lot of exciting players. I think guys that we're probably going to be seeing in the WBC fairly shortly. They're really exciting. I was going through Team Japan today, and there's like even more guys than those that we know that are just really interesting if you dig into some of the data. We have synergy, so we were able to go in and look at some of the video from that league, which is a lot of fun. So I think it's going to be a fun day, really interesting. Everybody that's on this live stream is going to be involved in that. So I want to thank you guys for participating, and everybody out there, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.